exposed my cheating girlfriend's secret social media life, leading to her family's complete downfall. It is often said that secrets have a way of revealing themselves, no matter how hard we try to hide them. I thought I knew everything about my girlfriend. Her likes, her dislikes, her passions. But there was one thing she kept hidden, and it would change everything. It all started when I noticed strange behavior. She was acting distant, constantly on her phone, and avoiding certain conversations. At first, I dismissed it as nothing, a sign of stress perhaps. But soon, my suspicions grew. One evening, I decided to take matters into my own hands, diving deep into her social media accounts. What I found shook me to my core. Behind the facade of our loving relationship, she had been living an entirely different life. A life filled with lies, deceit, and a web of connections I never imagined. What came next was something I could never have predicted. Her secret life didn't just destroy our relationship. It tore apart everything she held dear. Stay tuned to hear how I exposed her double life, leading to her family's complete downfall. First, everything seemed perfect. We were a couple who had shared so many good moments together. Our bond was one that I thought was unbreakable. We had built something meaningful over time. We spent hours talking, laughing, and dreaming about our futures, and I thought, this is it. This is the one. She was my best friend, my confidant, the person I believed I could trust with everything. But as the months passed, things started to shift. At first, it was subtle, small changes that could easily be overlooked. She became a bit more distant, a little less open. Her attention seemed to drift away from our relationship. She began to put more distance between us, especially when it came to her phone and social media. For the longest time, I chose to ignore the signs. I convinced myself that maybe it was nothing. After all, everyone deserves their privacy, right? She had a social media presence, a large one, in fact, and I never thought anything of it. But when she started becoming increasingly secretive about it, that's when the alarms started ringing. Her behavior became erratic, especially when I would casually ask about her posts or check her phone. She started changing the passwords to her accounts more frequently. She began taking calls in private, sneaking off to the other room when the phone rang. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, that I was just overthinking things. But it was hard to ignore how her once transparent social media life became filled with gaps and strange silences. There were fewer posts of us together, fewer photos of our outings, and fewer tags when we went out. It wasn't that I was expecting her to flood her feed with photos of us, but the sudden silence felt off. So, I started paying closer attention, watching her more closely when we were together. I noticed other changes, too. She became irritable when I asked questions about her phone or her online presence. She seemed more defensive, as though she was hiding something, though I couldn't place what it was. There was a growing sense of unease that I couldn't shake off. Something was wrong, and I felt it deep down in my gut. We met through mutual friends, and the connection between us was instant. She was funny, charming, and incredibly easy to talk to. Everything about her seemed perfect in the beginning, and I found myself drawn to her effortlessly. She had a way of making everyone feel special, and that's what made me fall for her. There was a warmth in her personality that drew me in, and I thought, this is the kind of person I want to spend my life with. We began dating shortly after meeting, and in those early days, everything seemed idyllic. We spent so much time together, enjoying each other's company and exploring the world as a couple. We went on trips, shared our personal stories, and had long conversations about our future. Everything felt so real, so right. There were no red flags, at least not initially. As the relationship progressed, things started to change. In the beginning, we would share everything, even the little details of our day. She was an open book, and I admired that about her. But over time, I noticed she became more guarded, especially when it came to her online life. She had a large following on social media, and I never thought much of it. I was used to the occasional photo of her out with friends or posts about her daily activities. But after a while, I noticed something that raised a flag. There were fewer photos of us together, fewer interactions between us on her social media accounts. She began sharing less about our relationship and more about herself, and not in a way that seemed like she was just being independent. It was more like she was trying to separate herself from me publicly. I didn't say anything at first, chalking it up to her wanting privacy. But as days passed, I began feeling like something was off. The more I thought about it, the more my suspicions grew. She began acting distant even when we were physically together. She was glued to her phone constantly, texting people I didn't know. She would lock her phone screen when I walked by, and she started to make excuses for why she couldn't spend time with me. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the signs were becoming too obvious to ignore. I had always trusted her, but something in my gut told me that she was hiding something. Something I couldn't quite figure out yet. I didn't know what to do with these feelings, but they gnawed at me. I knew that eventually, I would have to find out what was really going on. The truth didn't come to me all at once. It was a slow burn, a creeping feeling that gnawed at me more with each passing day. But the moment it fully hit me was when I discovered the messages. I had never intended to go through her things, but sometimes, the weight of my suspicions made it impossible to ignore. It all began on an ordinary evening. We were sitting on the couch watching a movie, or at least I was. She had her phone in her hands, scrolling absent-mindedly, barely glancing at the screen. I had just gotten up to grab some water when I noticed something strange. Her phone was still unlocked. Normally, she was protective about her privacy, always locking the phone when she wasn't using it. This time, though, it was just sitting there wide open. I stood there, staring at the phone. I didn't want to snoop. I really didn't. But the question hanging over me, what was she hiding, pulled me in. My heart raced as I looked at the screen, the temptation growing by the second. Without thinking, I glanced at the message thread that was open. At first, it was just innocent banter, casual, friendly exchanges with her friends. But then, as I scrolled, I saw a name that made my stomach drop. James. James was an old friend of hers from college. They had always kept in touch, but I'd never thought much of it. They talked now and then, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. That was until I read their most recent conversation. The messages started off casually, but then they took a sudden turn. They were talking about meeting up, plans to grab coffee, and then, there it was, a comment that made my breath catch. I can't wait to see you again. Last time was incredible, I keep thinking about it. I still can't believe we did that. I froze. I felt my world tilt, the air in the room thickening with every word I read. I read the message again, and this time it hit me they had been together. My mind raced to make sense of what I was seeing. What did last time mean? Why was she hiding this from me? I could feel the anger rising in my chest. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt, but the realization that she had been lying to me all this time. I continued to scroll, each message more damning than the last. There was no denying it anymore. She had cheated on me, and worse, she had been sneaky about it. The more I read, the more my anger turned into disbelief. How had she managed to keep this secret for so long? I had been so blind, trusting her every word, never questioning her actions. I felt sick to my stomach. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I couldn't bring myself to do it just yet. Not like this. Instead, I stepped away from the phone, trying to gather my thoughts. The silence in the room felt suffocating, and my mind was racing at 1,000 miles per hour. I needed a plan. I needed to confront her, but I had to be careful. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was a complete collapse of everything I had believed about our relationship. It was then that I noticed something else. Her social media, what used to be a vibrant collection of moments between us, had slowly turned into something unrecognizable. She had posted a picture of her with James, a photo taken in the same cafe where they had met, their hands intertwined. It was the picture-perfect display of what they had shared, but I never knew. She had played it off as a harmless lunch with an old friend, but it was so much more than that. I began to dig deeper. I combed through her past posts, her private messages with other people, and it became clear that her entire life had been a facade. Every sweet word she had ever said to me now felt like a lie. Every, "I love you," and every, "I'm here for you," felt hollow. How could she live this double life without me knowing? How could she betray me so completely? The more I uncovered, the more disgusted I became. It wasn't just about her cheating. It was about the way she had carefully built this secret life while I was completely oblivious. And what hurt the most was that she showed no remorse, no regret. It was as if this betrayal didn't even faze her. I finally confronted her that night. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just calmly showed her the messages, the pictures, everything I had found. The look on her face was one of surprise, but not guilt. She didn't apologize. She didn't even seem sorry for what she had done. Instead, she shrugged it off as if it was no big deal. She tried to justify her actions, blaming me for not being enough, for not fulfilling her needs, but deep down, I knew that this had nothing to do with me. It was then that I realized I couldn't stay with someone who had no respect for me. Someone who thought it was acceptable to betray me in the worst way possible and then act as though nothing was wrong. My trust in her was shattered beyond repair, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The confrontation was inevitable. It had been building inside me for days, each passing moment with her growing more unbearable. But when I finally confronted her, it wasn't with anger or shouting. I was beyond that. I had seen the truth, and the truth hurt far more than any outburst could. I sat her down in the living room, the space that had once been filled with laughter and love, now suffocating with tension. Her face was a mixture of surprise and annoyance. She hadn't expected me to find out like this. Her eyes darted nervously to her phone, as though she was already trying to plan her defense. I placed the device on the table, the messages between her and James now exposed, laid bare for her to see. At first, she was silent, staring at the screen. Her lips trembled, and for a fleeting moment, I thought she might say something, anything. acknowledging the hurt she had caused. But instead, she sighed, leaning back into the couch as if to dismiss the gravity of the situation. I watched her face, searching for some trace of remorse, but there was nothing. No apology, no guilt. It was as if she had already made peace with her actions. The coldness in her eyes was a stark contrast to the person I had once trusted with my heart. "I'm not sure why you're making such a big deal out of this," she said, her tone flat, almost indifferent. "It's just a little harmless fun, right? I never meant for it to go this far." Those words hit me like a punch in the gut. Harmless fun. That's how she saw it. A simple fling, no different from any other. There was no apology in her voice, no regret, just a casual dismissal of everything we had built together. The life we shared, the trust one had placed in her. All of it was nothing more than a trivial thing to be tossed aside. I felt a cold anger rising in me, but I remained calm. "Harmless fun," I repeated. "You really think that's all it was? What about the lies? The secrecy? The fact that you've been sneaking around behind my back for who knows how long?" She shrugged, as if the situation were beneath her. "I didn't think it mattered. You weren't giving me what I needed. You were always too busy, always too distant. I thought I was entitled to a little attention elsewhere." It was clear now that I was nothing more than a convenience to her. She had spent years with me, but the moment things didn't go the way she wanted, she turned to someone else. She had justified everything in her mind to make herself feel better about her actions. There was no remorse, no sense of betrayal on her end. Just an endless list of excuses. As she spoke, I felt my world crumble around me. All the moments I had cherished, our time together, our shared experiences, the trust one had given her, had been a facade. What I had thought was a committed, loving relationship was, in her eyes, a temporary arrangement, one that she had no qualms about throwing away the moment it became inconvenient. But what struck me most was the way she dismissed her actions. It wasn't even about the affair itself. It was about the complete disregard for the bond we had. I had been a fool to believe that I meant anything to her, to believe that she saw me as her partner. Instead, I was just another person in her life to manipulate and discard at will. I tried to understand her perspective, to find a shred of reasoning behind her actions. But there was nothing. She didn't want to be fixed. She didn't want to make amends. She didn't even want to acknowledge how deeply she had hurt me. She wanted to move on, to forget, to continue as though nothing had happened. When I asked her about the other messages, the ones between her and James, it was as if she couldn't care less. "We had fun, okay? It wasn't meant to be anything serious. I didn't expect it to ruin everything." Her words stung. I had invested my heart, my trust, my future into this relationship, and she was willing to throw it all away for some fleeting excitement. Couldn't wrap my mind around it. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but I knew that nothing would come from that. And then it hit me, the real damage was not just in the affair itself. It was the way she saw our entire relationship. To her, it was just something to pass the time, something to be tossed aside when the thrill of it had worn off. She didn't see the years we had spent building a life together. She didn't see the commitment. She didn't see me. As I sat there, listening to her try to justify her actions, a part of me began to break. I realized that this was no longer the woman I had married. The woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone who was selfish, cold, and willing to destroy everything for her own satisfaction. I took a deep breath and stood up. I didn't want to hear any more. I didn't need to. This wasn't a conversation worth having anymore. My mind was made up. "I think it's clear that there's nothing left to say," I said, my voice steady but full of finality. "You've shown me who you really are, and I'm done." The silence that followed felt suffocating. I turned my back to her, walking out of the room, knowing that there was no going back from this. She didn't try to stop me. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She didn't even apologize. It was over. The days after that confrontation were a blur of emotions. I had always thought I could forgive. I had always believed that love could overcome anything. But what I had learned that day shattered that belief. How could I forgive someone who had so casually thrown away everything we had built together? I spent the first few nights in a daze, trying to process what had happened. My mind couldn't stop replaying the conversation. Her words, the coldness in her eyes. I felt lost not just because of the betrayal, but because of how little she seemed to care. In my heart, I knew that there was no way to go back from this. What we had was gone, and it was beyond repair. I found myself asking the same question over and over. How had I missed the signs? How had I not seen the cracks in our relationship before? But the truth was, I had been blind to them, too consumed by love and trust to see the person she had truly become. I had placed my faith in her, and in return, she had trampled all over it. She continued to try and reach out to me, sending messages, calling, even showing up at my door, but I didn't want to hear her excuses anymore. The woman I had known, the one I had loved, had evaporated into thin air. Now, all I saw was someone who had taken my kindness for granted, someone who was too selfish to understand the depth of the damage she had caused. One evening, after another of her failed attempts at contact, I found myself sitting alone, staring out the window. The silence in the house was deafening, a reminder of how hollow everything had become. I thought about what I needed to do next. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about me. It was about finding a way to heal, to move forward, to reclaim the life she had taken from me. The decision was difficult, but in the end it became clear. I had to let go. There was no future for us, no reconciliation. I had tried to salvage it, but in my heart, I knew that nothing would ever make this right. It wasn't just the affair. It was the betrayal of my trust, the disregard for my feelings, and the complete lack of remorse. She had shown me who she was, and that person was no longer someone I wanted in my life. I started by changing everything. I moved my things out of the house, packed up the memories, and began the process of creating a life without her. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I felt the weight of the loss. I had to remind myself every day that I was doing the right thing. My heart wanted to cling to the good times, to the hope that maybe she would change, but my mind knew better. I could no longer allow myself to live in a world of lies and hurt. At first, the anger was overwhelming. I wanted to scream, to make her feel the pain I was going through. But I knew that wouldn't help. It wouldn't change anything. Instead, I focused on healing. I spent time with friends who had supported me through it all. I took long walks to clear my head, worked on myself, and most importantly, I allowed myself to grieve. As the weeks went by, the pain gradually lessened. The anger faded into a quiet understanding that she was not the person I had thought she was. And though the hurt remained, I realized that I was stronger than I had ever been before. I had faced the darkest part of my life and survived. And then came the final blow to her. I exposed everything. It wasn't something I had planned to do at first, but as I reflected on everything she had done to me, it became clear. She had wrecked our relationship without a second thought, without any remorse. I knew that she had to face the consequences of her actions. I posted everything, the screenshots of the conversations, the pictures, the proof of her lies on social media. It wasn't just for me, but for anyone else who needed to see the truth. I wanted people to know what she had done, to see her for who she really was. And I wasn't the only one who knew now. The people she had been close to, her family, her friends, they all found out the hard way. It wasn't just her life that was ruined. It was her entire social circle, too. They couldn't ignore it, couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. She had built a reputation based on lies and deceit, and it all came crashing down around her. Her family, especially, was devastated. They had always thought so highly of her, and now they had to come to terms with the fact that the woman they had loved and trusted had betrayed not only me, but them too. They had questions, and for once, she had no answers. Her apologies, her regrets, came too late. They had no weight anymore, no real substance. It was all too little, too late. I had no desire to hurt her, but the reality was clear. She had hurt me beyond repair. She had shown me who she really was, and now the world could see it too. I had to live with the consequences of her actions, but I could at least take control of my own life. I would never allow someone like her to hold any power over me again. As time passed, I learned to let go of the anger. I realized that no amount of revenge would change what happened. The most important thing was that I had taken back control of my life. I had faced the truth, no matter how painful it was, and I had made the right choice. My journey of healing was still ongoing, but I knew one thing for sure. I was better off without her. She was part of my past now. A chapter 1 had closed for good. And though it had taken time, I was finally free. If you found this story compelling, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new story.